The rage in Don Esteban's eyes promised destruction as he towered over Sofia, demanding the return of the champion racehorse she had nursed back from death's door. With her hand steady on Thunder's neck, she looked the wealthy man directly in the eyes and uttered the word that could cost her everything: no. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Don Esteban Valverde's estate was a monument to power and wealth, accumulated over decades of shrewd business dealings. Marble stables, pastures manicured like green carpets, and a team of employees dedicated exclusively to the care of his horses formed part of this equestrian empire. Among all his prized possessions, one horse stood above the rest: Thunder, a jet-black thoroughbred whose bearing was worthy of kings. His mane rippled in the wind like a flag, and his steps on the track were a spectacle that left spectators open-mouthed. Thunder wasn't just a horse, he was Don Esteban's pride. In every race, the millionaire wagered not only money, but his prestige. The golden trophies decorating his office reflected Thunder's victories. However, fate had other plans for them both. On that fateful day during an important race, Thunder broke from the starting gate with his characteristic strength, precision, and a speed that seemed to defy the wind itself. Don Esteban watched from the VIP stands in his trademark gray suit and wide-brimmed hat. "That horse is invincible," he murmured confidently to his guests, who nodded with artificial smiles. But as the race was about to end, something went terribly wrong at the final turn. Thunder's left foreleg slipped on the damp ground, and his nearly 100-pound body collapsed in a cloud of dust. The crowd fell silent. The commentators halted their enthusiastic narration. Thunder tried to stand, but an acute pain made him stagger. Assistants rushed toward him while Don Esteban cursed from his seat. Hours later at the veterinary clinic came the news that would change everything. The diagnosis was clear. Thunder had suffered a severe tendon injury. With rest and therapy, he could recover enough to lead a normal life, but he would never race again. The news was a blow to Esteban. "How much will the rehabilitation cost?" he asked in a cold tone. "A few months of intensive therapy with specialized equipment and constant care. It won't be cheap, but it's possible," explained the veterinarian. Esteban pressed his lips together. He wasn't a man accustomed to spending money on something that wouldn't generate profits. For him, a horse incapable of racing was like a car without an engine, useless. That same night, while the ranch employees retired to rest, Esteban made his decision. He called two of his most loyal workers, men who knew how to follow orders without asking questions. "I want you to take Thunder far away from here. I don't care where, but I don't want him on my land," he ordered firmly. The men looked at each other uncomfortably, but didn't dare question him. They knew that working for Don Esteban meant obeying without complaint. So past midnight, they drove the truck to the main stable where Thunder was resting. The horse, although exhausted from pain, raised his head at the sound of the doors. There was something in his eyes that conveyed a mixture of confusion and sadness, as if he sensed what was coming. The men, unable to look at him directly, led him carefully to the truck. One of them gently stroked his neck before loading him. "Forgive me, friend," he murmured. The journey was long and silent. The truck traveled lonely roads, moving away from the estate and into increasingly inhospitable terrain. Finally, near a creek in the middle of a desolate landscape, they stopped. They unloaded Thunder carefully, but without saying another word. When they started the engine to leave, Thunder tried to follow them, visibly limping, but the effort was futile. The men disappeared into the darkness, leaving the horse alone under a cloudy sky. At dawn, the landscape surrounding him was as unfamiliar as it was inhospitable. Thunder dragged himself with effort to the creek to drink water. His reflection on the surface returned the image of a horse that was no longer the champion everyone had admired. His injured leg hurt with each step, but instinct pushed him to keep moving. There was no food, no shelter, and the only thing accompanying him was the echo of the river. Thus, the majestic thoroughbred that had been a millionaire's pride was reduced to a vulnerable being, abandoned to his fate in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. The sun had barely begun to tinge the hills golden when Sophia, a 19-year-old girl, left her small adobe house located on the edge of a valley. Her home was humble, with weathered walls and tile roofs that barely withstood the rains, but it was full of warmth. Despite difficulties, Sophia always maintained a smile on her face. She had grown up surrounded by animals, and since she was little, her father had taught her that every living being deserved respect and care. Although her father was no longer there, she continued practicing those values every day. That morning, Sophia decided to go to the nearby creek to collect water. Her donkey, Bruno, accompanied her patiently, carrying 2 empty pitchers on his sides. Sophia, with her brown hair gathered in a braid and her somewhat worn blue dress, walked barefoot on the dirt path. At her side ran Luna, a mixed-breed dog with large ears and a curious gaze. As she advanced, something caught her attention. In the distance, by the trees bordering the creek, she spotted a dark figure moving with difficulty. At first, she thought it might be an injured deer, but as she approached, she realized it was a horse. A horse? "What's it doing here alone?" Sophia murmured, stopping a few meters away. The animal was large and intense black that stood out even under the faint morning light. Its mane was tangled, and its body covered with dust and small wounds. Although its bearing was imposing, it was noticeably exhausted. The horse's left foreleg was swollen, and it visibly limped while trying to drink water from the creek. Sophia felt a knot in her stomach. She had seen injured horses before, but never one so majestic and in such a deplorable state. She took a step toward him, but the horse suddenly raised his head and backed away with a weak neigh, as if fearing harm. "Easy, easy," Sophia said softly, raising her hands to show she had no ill intentions. "I'm not going to hurt you." Luna, the dog, moved forward and barked a couple of times, but Sophia stopped her. "Luna, don't scare him," she ordered in a whisper. Sophia remained still, carefully observing the horse. There was something in his gaze that deeply moved her. Not just physical pain, but a kind of sadness that seemed to come from his soul. She decided she couldn't leave him there. "Someone must have abandoned you, but that doesn't mean your story ends here," she told him, as if the animal could understand her. With slow movements, Sophia took from her bag a piece of bread she had brought for breakfast. She extended it toward the horse, maintaining distance to avoid frightening him. The animal sniffed the air, hesitating, but hunger finally overcame him. He took a couple of wobbly steps toward her and carefully took the bread. "That's it, boy. You're safe," she said with a gentle smile. Once she managed to get closer, Sophia examined the injured leg. Although she wasn't a veterinarian, she knew enough to notice that the inflammation was serious and the horse needed urgent help. She looked toward the creek and then at Bruno, who was patiently waiting with the empty pitchers. "It's going to be difficult, but I can't leave you here," she said with determination. Sophia improvised a sort of halter with the rope she carried for Bruno, and with great patience guided the horse away from the creek. The animal limped with each step, but seemed to trust Sophia enough to follow her. The journey back to the ranch was slow. Bruno walked in front with the pitchers while Luna trotted to one side, watching over the injured horse. Throughout the journey, Sophia spoke in a low voice, trying to reassure the animal. "I'll call you Thunder," she said suddenly, remembering her father's stories about horses as fast as the wind. "It's a good name, don't you think?" When they arrived at the small ranch, Sophia led Thunder to the improvised stable where she normally kept Bruno. Although the space was small, it was clean and had enough straw for the horse to rest. Bruno, generous as always, gave up his place without complaint while Sophia brought fresh water and a blanket to cover Thunder. The young girl spent hours caring for the swollen leg with warm water and herbs she had learned to use from her grandmother. She cleaned the wound with delicacy. The horse neighed softly at the contact but didn't resist. He seemed to understand that Sophia only wanted to help him. "I don't know where you come from, but here no one is going to abandon you," she told him while stroking his neck. That night, as the moon illuminated the valley, Thunder finally lay down on the straw, exhausted, but with some peace. Sophia, sitting next to him, felt a mixture of sadness and hope. She knew that caring for a horse in those conditions wouldn't be easy, especially with her limited resources, but she couldn't turn her back on him. "I promise I'll do everything possible for you," she whispered before turning off the oil lamp. While the wind whispered through the trees, Thunder closed his eyes, feeling for the first time in days that he wasn't alone. Days passed slowly at the small ranch, and each one presented a challenge for both Sophia and Thunder. The horse that had arrived weak and fearful was beginning to adapt to the young girl's constant care. His leg remained swollen, and each step he took seemed a reminder of the accident that had changed his destiny. But the tranquil environment and Sophia's affection were starting to give him back something he had lost: hope. Every morning, Sophia woke before dawn to tend to Thunder. The routine was demanding, cleaning the wound, applying poultices with herbs she collected from nearby hills, and making sure he ate enough to regain his strength. Resources were scarce, but she always found a way to care for her animals. "Come on, Thunder, today is a good day to try walking a bit more," she would say while holding the rope she had converted into an improvised halter. At first, attempts to make the horse move beyond the stable were frustrating. Thunder, though willing, would stop after a few meters, visibly limping. But Sophia didn't give up. Patient, she spoke to him tenderly, stroked him, and encouraged him to take one more step. "You know, Dad used to say horses are like us. They need someone to believe in them to overcome fear," she told him while guiding him toward the nearby creek. "And I believe in you, Thunder." With time, these short walks began to bear fruit. The inflammation in his leg was gradually decreasing, and Thunder was regaining some strength. Though he still limped, there was a different gleam in his eyes, a spark that reflected the impact of Sophia's care and affection. One afternoon, while collecting firewood to heat water, Sophia stopped to observe Thunder from a distance. He was with Luna and Bruno, who seemed to accept him as part of their small family. The young girl couldn't help but smile. Although she knew the road to recovery was long, Thunder's progress was proof that the effort was worth it. However, caring for Thunder wasn't simple. The expenses for food and medicine were beginning to weigh on Sophia's pocket. Her only source of income was selling eggs and milk at the town market, and with winter approaching, she knew sales would decrease. "I'm going to need help to get by, but I won't give up on you," she told the horse one night while brushing him with an old wooden comb. Thunder, as if understanding Sophia's words, moved his ears toward her and looked at her with those deep eyes that moved her so much. Sophia let out a little laugh. "Are you telling me you trust me? All right, but I also need you to do your part." The weeks continued, and the bond between them strengthened each day. Sophia talked to Thunder as if he were a close friend, telling him her dreams and concerns. "You know, I've always wanted to have my own animal shelter, a place where no horse, dog, or donkey is rejected. Would be nice, don't you think?" she said while stroking him under his mane. Thunder neighed softly as if responding. One day, during one of their walks to the creek, Sophia encountered Doña Clara, an older woman from town who usually stopped by the ranch to buy fresh milk. Upon seeing Thunder, Clara was impressed by his bearing, even in his state of recovery. "What a beautiful horse you have, Sophia. Where did you get him?" asked Clara, approaching cautiously. "I found him abandoned near the creek. He was injured, but little by little he's improving," responded Sophia with a mixture of pride and modesty. Clara observed the horse attentively. This is no ordinary horse. This animal is of fine blood, I'm sure. Look at his body, his muscles, even now that he's thinner. Haven't you thought he might have belonged to someone important? The question left Sophia thoughtful. She had never considered that Thunder might have been more than an abandoned horse. His majestic bearing had always seemed special to her, but she never imagined he might have had a different past than any other injured animal she had rescued. Whoever his former owner was, they left him behind as if he was worth nothing, she said firmly. Now he's here, and that's all that matters. Clara nodded, but couldn't help feeling curious. If you need help with him, let me know. My nephew works in the capital at a place where they care for horses like this. Maybe he could give you some advice. Sophia thanked her for the offer, though in her heart, she felt that Thunder no longer needed anything more than her care and affection. For her, the horse wasn't just an animal. He was a reflection of her own struggle to get ahead despite difficulties. That night, while the wind whispered through the trees and the stars shone in the sky, Sophia sat beside Thunder, resting her head against his side. I don't know what your life was like before coming here, but I promise you'll never be alone again, she said quietly. The horse, as if understanding, gently inclined his head toward her, closing his eyes with a tranquility he hadn't felt in a long time. Meanwhile, at one of the luxurious properties of magnate Esteban Valverde, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted regardless of the cost, chaos reigned. Esteban, 47, owned a successful chain of real estate and agricultural companies, and his fortune had made him an influential figure in the most exclusive circles of the region. However, behind his elegant facade hid a ruthless man who valued everything solely based on its utility or benefit. That afternoon, while reviewing some contracts in his spacious office with walls decorated in wood and equestrian trophies, Esteban was interrupted by his foreman, Hernan, a robust man with a serious expression who seemed uncomfortable upon entering. Mr. Valverde, we have a problem. We haven't found the horse. Esteban dropped his fountain pen forcefully on the table and looked up, frowning. What do you mean you haven't found Thunder? What kind of incompetence is this? We've searched all around the estate, sir. The last we know is that after the injury he escaped toward the forest. We thought he wouldn't survive long in those conditions. Esteban rose from his chair, his face reddened with anger. Thunder is not just any horse, Hernan. He's the most expensive animal I've bought. Do you have any idea what that horse represents to me? My reputation is at stake. Hernan tried to calm the situation. Sir, it's likely someone found him. We can keep searching in the nearby communities. Listen carefully, Hernan, interrupted Esteban in a threatening tone. That horse carries my name and my mark. I won't allow him to end up in the hands of just anyone. Do whatever is necessary to recover him, and if you can't, don't bother coming back. Meanwhile, at Sophia's ranch, days passed calmly. The young girl continued caring for Thunder with dedication. Although he still limped slightly, the horse showed signs of recovery each day. His body, once covered with wounds, now looked stronger and healthier thanks to Sophia's feeding and affection. One afternoon, while returning from walking with Thunder through the valley, Tomas, a neighbor passing by with his train of donkeys, stopped upon seeing the imposing black horse. Wow, Sophia, where did you get that animal? He asked admiringly, tipping his hat to look better. I found him abandoned near the creek. He was in bad shape, but little by little he's improved, she responded with a mixture of pride and humility. Tomas crossed his arms, carefully observing Thunder. This is no ordinary horse, Sophia. He has the bearing of fine blood. Maybe he's from some important estate. I wouldn't be surprised if someone is looking for him. Sophia felt a chill hearing that, but she remained firm. If someone wanted him, they wouldn't have left him in those conditions. To me, Thunder doesn't belong to anyone else anymore. He's part of my family." Tomas nodded with an understanding smile, but before leaving he threw out a warning. "Just be careful. The owners of horses like this aren't always kind people." That night, while feeding Thunder and stroking him under his mane, Sofia couldn't stop thinking about Tomas's words. The possibility that someone might come to claim him filled her with uneasiness. "I promised I wouldn't leave you alone, Thunder," she whispered with determination, "and I'm going to keep that promise, no matter what." But in the nearby town, Hernan and two of Esteban's helpers had already begun asking questions with a photograph of Thunder in hand. They roamed the streets seeking information. It didn't take long for them to find someone who had seen a humble young girl walking with a majestic black horse around the valley. "They say she lives in a small ranch near the creek to the south," one of the helpers informed. Hernan nodded with a mixture of relief and tension. He knew that facing Esteban Valverde with the news wouldn't be easy, especially because the businessman never accepted that something he considered his was in the hands of others. "Prepare the horses. Early tomorrow, we'll go to that place," ordered Hernan. That night, while the moon illuminated the ranch, Sofia stroked Thunder without imagining that the horse's past was getting closer to catching up with them. The sun had barely begun to appear on the horizon when Hernan and his men arrived at Sofia's small ranch. The fresh morning air and the tranquil landscape contrasted with the tension that hung in the atmosphere. After several hours of travel, they had found the place thanks to directions from neighbors. Although Sofia's ranch was far from the city, its strategic location near the creek and surrounded by mountains made it an ideal place for raising animals. Though limited in resources, the modest but welcoming country house was surrounded by trees that gave shade to the horses and animals in general, the perfect corner for Thunder to recover from his accident. The sound of hooves resonated in the distance, and Sofia, who was in the stable tending to Thunder, raised her head upon hearing the horse's steps approaching. Her first instinct was to remain calm, but something inside told her that this day wouldn't be like the others. When she stepped outside, she saw 3 men mounted on well-fed horses, completely different from her own. At their head rode Hernan, Esteban Valverde's foreman, a man Sofia had heard mentioned many times in town, but had never had the opportunity to meet. Hernan dismounted quickly and approached Sofia with a serious expression. His cold, calculating gaze examined her from head to toe, as if evaluating whether she was worthy of his time. At his side, the 2 men accompanying him remained silent, observing the scene with apparent disinterest but never losing sight of Sofia. "Good morning, miss," began Hernan, his voice deep and authoritative. "We're looking for a black horse of fine breed. Have you seen one around here?" Sofia, who didn't know the men or their intentions, tried to stay calm, although a knot began to form in her stomach. "A black horse? Yes, it's possible. I found an injured one near the creek a few days ago. I've been caring for him, but I don't know anything about fine breeds. I only know he was in bad shape when I found him." Hernan observed her for a moment, as if trying to read her mind, then let out a sigh of frustration and said firmly, "That horse belongs to my boss, Esteban Valverde. He was on one of his properties but disappeared after suffering an accident. Where is he?" The name Esteban Valverde made Sofia shiver slightly, though she didn't show it. She knew enough about Esteban to understand he wasn't a man of noble principles. In town, rumors circulated about how he treated his employees and animals, and she never thought someone so cruel could be the owner of an animal as majestic as Thunder. However, she knew she couldn't easily surrender. "If he's yours, why was he abandoned in the forest, injured and without care?" Sofia responded, keeping her gaze fixed on Hernan's eyes. "No one who truly loves an animal would leave it in that state. I don't know why he did it, but it doesn't seem fair to claim him now as if he were simple property." Hernan frowned, visibly annoyed by the young woman's firmness. "That's not your business. My boss is the owner of that horse, and that means it's under his right. If you found it, you hand it over. It's that simple. Sophia felt her heart beating faster, but she wasn't going to yield. She had cared for Thunder with dedication and affection, and she wasn't going to let them drag him back to a life of negligence. I'm sorry, but the horse isn't leaving here. I found him, I healed him, and now he's part of this place. I'm not handing him over to anyone. Hernan, seeing that the young woman wasn't going to give in, took a step closer, his face hardened by frustration. Don't make this more difficult, Sophia. My boss has many resources and knows how to get what he wants. I don't want us to have to resort to more drastic methods. Hernan's words weren't empty. Sophia could see in his gaze that this man was accustomed to handling situations of force, but she wasn't going to be intimidated. Her response was calm, but firm. I'm not moving from here. If Esteban Valverde really wants Thunder, he'll have to come face me himself. The air became charged with tension. It was then that Thunder made his appearance. The horse, which had been resting near the shed, slowly approached Sophia, as if defending his territory. Although he still limped slightly, his imposing bearing and majestic presence didn't go unnoticed. With his eyes fixed on the men, he approached cautiously but decisively. This horse has more heart than you believe, murmured Sophia, gently stroking his neck. And I won't let you take him. Hernan, seeing the horse's reaction, paused for a moment, surprised by the connection between Sophia and the animal. However, he quickly regained his composure and took a step back. We'll see about that. Esteban won't forgive this. This horse belongs to him, and he'll recover it, whatever it costs. Sophia looked at him steadily, refusing to be intimidated. Then let him come claim it himself. The men, without saying another word, mounted their horses and began to move away, leaving behind a heavy air of threat. Sophia watched as they retreated down the path, but she didn't relax until they were completely out of sight. With a sigh of relief, Sophia turned to Thunder, who was now at her side. She stroked him gently without stopping to look at him. None of this is easy, right? But don't worry, I won't let you go. The horse, as if understanding her words, offered a soft neigh and moved his head toward her. Sophia smiled, feeling a deep connection with the animal. She knew that what had begun as a simple task of healing an injured horse had now become a fight for his freedom. The air had begun to calm after Hernan and his men's visit, but Sophia couldn't help feeling uneasy. The memories of his words and the latent threat of Esteban Valverde accompanied her for the rest of the day. As she walked alongside Thunder, who now seemed much more relaxed, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about what would come. She knew that confrontation hadn't ended, it had only been postponed. In her small ranch, Sophia continued her routine, but a constant worry had settled in her heart. She knew Esteban Valverde wouldn't easily stop. His money and power made him unstoppable, and if there was one thing she had learned from her humble life, it was that those like him were never content with less than what they wanted. Thunder's future was at stake, and she couldn't allow him to be snatched away. Meanwhile, in Esteban Valverde's mansion, the atmosphere was completely different. The opulence of his home, with marble columns and ornamental statues, reflected his ego and power. In his office, a crystal lamp illuminated the plans and documents scattered across the table. Esteban, a 47-year-old man with an imposing bearing, was seated behind his desk looking at a photo of Thunder. "It's absurd," murmured Esteban, running his hand over his face. "How could I let this happen?" Hernan had returned a few hours earlier with bad news. The search had been unsuccessful, and the young woman who had found the horse didn't seem willing to hand him over. Esteban's frustration increased as he thought of the time and money he had invested in that animal. Thunder had been one of the most promising horses in his stable, a fine-bred horse that represented his status among other millionaires and cattle ranchers. He couldn't afford to lose him. Not for anything. "What do you want me to do, Hernan?" Esteban asked, looking fixedly at his foreman. "Should we simply go there and take him by force?" Hernan, a man who had been in Esteban's service for years, knew that these types of actions weren't his style. Despite his fearsome character, Esteban had always preferred more subtle strategies. "I think we should be more persuasive, sir. The girl is stubborn, but she can't ignore the law for long. And if she does, there are ways to make her understand." Esteban nodded thoughtfully. "I need this resolved quickly. I can't waste more time on this matter. If that girl doesn't understand reason, I'll make her understand the hard way." At that moment, an assistant entered the office, interrupting the conversation. "Sir, there's someone at the door who wants to speak with you. He says he's the girl's lawyer." Esteban frowned. A lawyer from a girl who lives on a lost ranch? What right does he think he has to come talk to me? However, an idea crossed Esteban's mind. Perhaps this was an opportunity to resolve the situation in a way that would ensure there would be no further complications. He decided to hear what the man had to say. Minutes later, a well-dressed man with a perfectly adjusted tie and a confident attitude entered the room. "Mr. Valverde, I present myself as the lawyer for Sofia Martinez, the young woman who is currently caring for your horse, Thunder." Esteban observed the lawyer with disdain, but gestured for him to speak. "What does this girl want now?" "My client, Mr. Valverde, offers you a proposal," began the lawyer with a calm and professional voice. "She is willing to reach an agreement, but she needs guarantees that Thunder will be treated with respect and won't be forced to work in inhumane conditions as occurred on your property." Esteban arched an eyebrow. "She doesn't seek money or compensation. She only wants the horse to be in good hands." Esteban remained silent for a moment, observing the lawyer and considering his words. Meanwhile, he thought about what losing Thunder really meant. He wasn't just an expensive horse. He was an extension of his image and power. If the young woman didn't yield, it could become more complicated than it was worth. "Fine, I'll talk to her," Esteban finally said, his tone still authoritative. "But let her know that I won't let her have the last word." Back at Sofia's ranch, the young woman had already begun to doubt if her stance would be enough to face Esteban Valverde's pressure. Her quiet and simple life had completely changed in the last few weeks. Concern for Thunder occupied each of her thoughts. However, when she saw Tomas return from the village, an old friend who had accompanied her in her early years, a new idea formed in her mind. "Do you think they can really take him from me?" Sofia asked, her voice trembling. Tomas, who knew her well, looked at her with understanding. "Sofia, you've done a lot for that horse. Don't let anyone make you feel less. If Esteban Valverde comes here, I'll be with you." Sofia smiled, grateful for his support, but she knew the battle wouldn't be easy. If she wanted to save Thunder, she would have to be willing to fight to the end. The tension between Sofia and Esteban Valverde began to increase. Both were willing to do whatever necessary to get what they wanted. Sofia was ready to fight for what she considered just, while Esteban saw in the young woman a threat to his authority. Soon the situation would reach its culminating point. But for Sofia, it didn't matter how many men or resources Esteban put at his disposal. Thunder was already part of her life, and nothing or nobody could separate them. The day had dawned gray and cloudy, as if presaging the storm that was approaching. At Sofia's ranch, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Although little time had passed since Hernan's visit, Sofia felt that the confrontation with Esteban Valverde was inevitable. The threat of his men continued to circle her mind, and the fact that he was willing to go so far for a horse like Thunder made her think that things would get much more difficult. Tomas had been with her all day, helping with the ranch chores, but he couldn't hide the concern on his face. Sophia, this guy isn't just anyone. He's not going to be satisfied with you telling him you won't hand him over. This matter could get very ugly. Sophia nodded, though her mind was firm. I know, Tomas, but I'm not going to yield. Thunder has been a part of this place since I found him injured, and I won't allow them to take him. Throughout my life, I've learned not to give up, and I won't do it now. At that moment, the sound of hooves interrupted the conversation. Sophia looked up and saw that a group of horses was approaching rapidly. Esteban Valverde was on his way, accompanied by Hernan and several more men. He wasn't alone. His presence was imposing, his face reflecting determination and arrogance. The air became even heavier, as if the storm that was forming was more than meteorological. It was the prelude to a confrontation that would change the destiny of all involved. When he dismounted from his horse, his eyes locked on Sophia, his cold and calculating gaze showing not even a hint of sympathy. "So here you are," he said in a grave voice. "Do you really think you can confront me, Sophia? I am Esteban Valverde, and what I want, I get." Sophia remained firm, though her pulse quickened at the proximity of the man who had threatened her peace. "You're wrong, Esteban. I'm not a woman who yields to threats, and even less when it comes to doing what's right. Thunder is here because I cared for him, and I won't allow you to drag him back to that hell you took him from." Esteban frowned but didn't let his anger overflow. Instead, his tone became softer but equally dangerous. "You're playing with fire, Sophia. If you want to keep that horse, what do you think you'll do? Fight against all my power, against everything I represent? The poor don't win battles against the rich, they never have." Sophia, without hesitating, took a step forward. "Maybe I don't have your money or your properties, Esteban, but I have something much more valuable, respect for what is just, and this horse deserves something better than what you offered him." Esteban's men watched the scene in silence, clearly surprised by Sophia's courage. Hernan, who stood at his side, looked at his boss nervously, aware that Sophia wasn't a woman easily intimidated. However, Esteban didn't seem willing to back down. "You think I care what you think?" he said with a cold smile. "Nothing you have here is enough to confront me. If you really believe this is your terrain, I'm mistaken, or perhaps you don't understand the magnitude of what you're provoking." Sophia, despite the pressure, didn't back down. "I know what I'm provoking. I'm defending what's mine, Esteban, and if you need to use force to take it from me, then I'll be ready to defend myself. Thunder isn't just a horse to me. He's a being that deserves freedom. And if you don't see that, it's what makes you truly small." The silence that followed was heavy. Esteban's men looked at their leader, waiting for a signal to act. But Esteban Valverde wasn't accustomed to being challenged so directly. For a moment it seemed he was weighing his options. However, the internal anger grew. He wasn't used to losing, and even less to being challenged by a young woman without the resources to confront him. "Fine," Esteban finally said, his tone of voice now lower but full of threat. "If what you want is a fight, you'll have it. But don't be mistaken, I always win." Sophia, with her gaze fixed on him, responded with a firmness that made Esteban's men pause for a moment. "I'm not looking for a fight, Esteban. I just want you to understand something. The truth will always prevail. No matter how large your fortune or how strong your power, heart and justice can't be bought." Esteban smiled, but this time his smile didn't have the usual confidence. "We'll see, Sophia. We'll see." At that instant, Esteban's men moved closer, some with an air of uncertainty in their steps while others awaited orders. Sophia couldn't let Esteban's words go unpunished. She knew this would be a crucial moment for her, for Thunder, and for her life. But something inside told her she wasn't alone in that fight. Though the road would be long and difficult, and though Esteban Valverde had all the power and resources on his side, Sofia was willing to fight to the end, not just for Thunder, but for what he represented: dignity and respect for the lives of animals. The sun began to hide behind the clouds while the confrontation between Sofia and Esteban Valverde reached its culminating point. Sofia's ranch, usually tranquil and peaceful, now felt like the scenario of an imminent war. Around her, Esteban's men remained alert, observing every movement, waiting for their boss to give the order to act. But Sofia didn't seem disturbed. She knew she was fighting for something much bigger than her own well-being. Esteban, with a look that reflected the disdain and arrogance that characterized him, stepped forward. "I'm not going to keep wasting my time, Sofia. This is your last opportunity. Do the right thing and give me the horse without more resistance. If you don't, you'll regret it." Sofia, without taking her eyes off him, took a deep breath. "I'm not going to give you Thunder. I've made a decision, and I'm not going to back down. You're used to getting everything you want with money and power, but you can't buy what you don't understand." Esteban observed her in silence, almost amused by the young woman's tenacity. The fact that someone like her was willing to challenge him infuriated him, but also awakened something in his interior that had long been dormant, a challenge that might not be so easy to overcome. For a moment he seemed to doubt, but he quickly recovered his posture. "If you think you're going to beat me, you're completely mistaken. The law is on my side, and I have all the resources to take what belongs to me," he said, his tone hardened by anger. Sofia lifted her head with firmness. "Not everything in life is resolved with the law, Esteban. There's something much more important than that: respect for living beings, for those who have no voice. And Thunder has his place here with me." Esteban took a step back, seeing that the young woman wasn't intimidated. He turned to Hernan, his right-hand man, and gave him a subtle signal. Hernan, always willing to do what his boss ordered, took out a pair of written orders from his jacket and extended them to Sofia. "This is what's best for you to do, Sofia," said Hernan with a serious look. "If you sign these papers, Thunder will be yours forever. Esteban guarantees there won't be reprisals. You just have to sign." Sofia looked at the papers being offered but wasn't impressed. She knew that Esteban Valverde's contracts were rarely what they seemed to be. Something inside told her that signature could tie her for life to his influence. "I'm sorry, Hernan. I'm not going to be part of your legal games," responded Sofia, rejecting the offer. The tension increased. Esteban, seeing that his attempts to intimidate Sofia weren't working, took another step closer. "You're right about one thing, Sofia. Not everything in life is resolved with the law, but I still have my methods." With an imperceptible gesture, Esteban made some of his men approach even closer. Sofia noticed the change in atmosphere. The threat was no longer just verbal. Esteban was willing to resort to force. "Wait," said Sofia, with a voice that had a mixture of calm and determination. "What you're doing is an abuse of power. I'm not going to allow that to happen. Whether by law or by my own courage, I'm going to fight for what is just." At that moment, Tomas's figure appeared from the shadows. The young man had been observing from the beginning, and though he didn't have the resources or power of Esteban, his loyalty and courage were unquestionable. "Sofia is right, Esteban," he said with a firm voice. "You can try to intimidate us, but you won't get what you want this way. This isn't your territory, and if you decide to do something, I assure you, you'll face more than you expect." Esteban, surprised by Tomas's presence, frowned but didn't react immediately. The young man was nothing more than a peasant without power, without money, but his determination seemed invincible. He was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there was something that couldn't be bought: the will of a humble people. "This isn't a threat, Esteban," continued Tomas. "It's a warning. If you continue forward, there will be consequences. Sofia isn't alone, and you're not going to destroy what we've built with your games of power." For a moment, Esteban seemed to doubt. He knew that if he opted for violence, it could be a much bigger problem than he was willing to handle. Despite his wealth, his influence didn't reach everywhere. There were limits to what he could do without attracting others' attention. However, the arrogance that defined him didn't allow him to back down completely. "Enough," ordered Esteban with a hard voice, looking at his men. "This matter is taking a turn I didn't expect, but let it be clear, Sofia, that the next time you interfere with my plans, there won't be warnings. This isn't a fight you can win." Sofia looked at him without flinching, her heart racing, but with an unbreakable inner strength. "The fight for Thunder has only just begun, Esteban. Don't be mistaken. Thunder is more than property to me. He's a life I've saved, and I'm not going to let you destroy him for your ego." With those words, Esteban, knowing he couldn't win today's battle, signaled his men to retreat. Though Sofia's face showed determination, she knew this victory was only temporary. Esteban Valverde wouldn't easily give up, but at that moment Sofia felt she had taken a crucial step to protect Thunder. The confrontation wasn't over. Esteban, with his wounded pride, had made it clear he wouldn't stop fighting for what he believed belonged to him, but Sofia had also shown she wasn't willing to yield, no matter the cost. The air at the ranch had calmed, but the tension persisted. Esteban Valverde and his men had withdrawn for the moment, but their threats still floated in the air like a shadow that wouldn't disappear. Sofia remained in the same place where she had defied Esteban, her chest agitated by adrenaline but without showing any sign of weakness. Tomas was at her side, still concerned but with the hope that the worst had already passed. "You did well, Sofia," said Tomas, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to fall, tinging the sky with warm tones. "But it won't be that easy. Esteban won't let this pass." Sofia nodded, looking at the place where Esteban's entourage had disappeared. Thunder, who had been observing everything from a distance, approached his majestic body to her as if he wanted to give her strength. "I know, Tomas, but I can't turn back. Thunder isn't just a horse. He's a life I've cared for and defended. And although Esteban thinks he can resolve everything with power and money, I won't allow it." Tomas observed her, impressed by the young woman's determination. He knew that although Esteban was a powerful man, Sofia had something he could never buy, the valor to fight for what was right. But Esteban's words continued to resonate in his mind, and doubt about what would happen in the future didn't stop tormenting him. "What will we do now? We can't stay here waiting for him to return. We need a plan." Sofia sighed deeply and looked at Thunder. It had been a long day, but she knew there was still much to do. Esteban Valverde wouldn't give up, and if there was one thing she had learned over the years, it was that threats from powerful men didn't easily dissolve. "The first thing is that we need to make sure Thunder is safe. I have to take him to a secure place where Esteban can't find him so easily," Sofia said with a firm voice. "And after that, we need to gather allies. We can't confront Esteban alone." Tomas frowned. "Allies? Who could help us?" Sofia smiled, though the smile was charged with a sadness she couldn't hide. "There are more people willing to fight for what's just than it seems. Esteban has his money, but we have something he doesn't have. The support of those who know what it is to lose, those who, like me, believe that money isn't everything." With determination, Sofia decided it was time to take the next step. She knew Esteban Valverde would take advantage of any weakness, and although she didn't have the resources of a rich man, she did have something much more valuable: the truth of her cause. Throughout the night, Sofia and Tomas prepared for what could be the final battle. They sought those who could be their allies, farmers, friends, and even people who, like her, understood the value of what truly mattered. It was time to show Esteban Valverde that Thunder wasn't alone and that Sofia's cause was stronger than any threat. When morning arrived, Esteban Valverde returned to the ranch, confident that Sofia would yield to his power. He didn't expect that upon crossing the ranch door, he would find something completely different. A multitude of people who, like Sofia, weren't willing to permit such a selfish man to destroy what had cost so much to build. "Sofia," said Esteban with a mocking smile while observing the number of people who had gathered, "you thought you could defy me with these people? They're just peasants. They don't know what it is to fight against someone like me." Sofia approached with firmness, looking Esteban in the eyes. "I may not know how to play your games, Esteban, but I know what it is to fight for what is right, and I won't yield. Thunder is safe here, and I won't allow you to take him." Esteban's face darkened. "We'll see, Sofia. I thought I could be reasonable, but now I see you're just stubborn. You think you can win? This isn't just a confrontation between you and me. It's a war that involves everyone." Sofia looked at him without fear. "It is a war, Esteban, yes, but it doesn't just involve everyone. It involves those who fight for justice, for life. And as long as you keep believing that money can buy everything, I assure you, you're going to lose. And this time I won't give up." A heavy silence fell over all those present. Esteban's men, who before showed confidence, began to waver upon seeing the unity of the villagers. Although Esteban was powerful, at that moment, Sofia and her community represented something he couldn't control, the collective determination of a people rising up for what they considered just. "You've made a mistake, Esteban," said Sofia with a firm and clear voice. "Because although you believe that money and power are everything, there's something you can't buy: respect, justice, and the fight for what is right." With those words, Esteban Valverde understood that the battle was lost. The look of those present, the strength of the community, and Sofia's determination had defeated him. Although he withdrew, his face reflected a mixture of rage and frustration, knowing that for the first time, someone had managed to beat him at his own game. Thunder, the horse that had been the cause of it all, remained at the ranch where he was finally free from Esteban Valverde's clutches. Sofia had won, but not just for her bravery, but for the strength of the community that had united in the fight for what was right. The confrontation had ended, but the message was clear: money and power aren't everything, and there will always be those who fight for justice. Sofia had shown that heart and courage can defeat even the most powerful. As Esteban and his men disappeared down the dusty path leading away from the ranch, a collective sigh of relief spread through the gathered crowd. No one had expected such a direct victory. Most had come prepared for a lengthy standoff, perhaps even violence. But the sight of so many united against him had made even Esteban Valverde reconsider. Tomas approached Sofia, who still stood tall, watching the retreating figures shrink into the distance. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You actually stood up to Esteban Valverde and won." Sofia turned to him, her expression serious. "It's not just me who won, Tomas. We all did. Without everyone here," she gestured to the villagers who were now starting to relax and talk among themselves, "this would have ended very differently." As she spoke, Thunder approached her, pushing his nose gently against her shoulder. The bond between them was evident to everyone watching. This wasn't merely a girl who had rescued a horse, but two souls who had found each other when they needed it most. Doña Clara, the elderly woman who had first recognized Thunder's fine breeding, made her way through the crowd. "Child," she said, taking Sofia's hand in her weathered ones, "what you did today will be remembered in this valley for generations. You've shown us all that sometimes, just sometimes, justice can prevail over money." The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. The villagers brought what little they could spare, some bread, cheese, fruit from their gardens, and homemade wine. Tables were set up in the open area in front of Sofia's humble house. and as the tension of the day melted away, laughter and conversation filled the air. Thunder remained close to Sophia throughout, occasionally wandering a few steps to accept an apple or carrot from an admiring villager, but always returning to her side. His leg, though healed enough to allow him to move comfortably, still bore the marks of his injury, a permanent reminder of what he had endured and overcome. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Sophia found a moment of quiet. She sat on the old wooden bench her father had built years ago, watching Thunder graze peacefully nearby. Tomas joined her, offering a cup of water. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Esteban may have left today, but a man like him doesn't give up easily." Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving Thunder. "I know, this isn't over. But today has shown me something important. I'm not alone in this fight, and neither is Thunder." "You could leave," Tomas suggested. "Take Thunder and go somewhere Esteban can't find you. Start fresh." Sophia considered this for a moment. The idea had its appeal. Freedom from the shadow of Esteban's threats, a new beginning for both her and Thunder. But as she looked around at the ranch that had been her home for all her life, at the faces of neighbors and friends who had stood with her, she knew she couldn't run. "This is our home, Tomas. Mine and Thunder's. Running away would mean Esteban wins in the end. No, we'll stay and face whatever comes next." Tomas smiled, not surprised by her answer. "Then we'll all be ready. Esteban Valverde may have money and power, but he's about to learn that some things can't be bought or bullied into submission." As the celebration continued into the evening, no one noticed the lone figure watching from the distant hillside. Hernan, Esteban's trusted foreman, observed the scene through binoculars, his face grim. His boss may have retreated today, but Hernan knew this was far from the end. He tucked the binoculars into his saddlebag and mounted his horse, riding swiftly back to deliver his report to Esteban. Meanwhile, in his luxurious mansion, Esteban Valverde paced the length of his study, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. The humiliation he had suffered at the hands of a simple peasant girl and her ragtag supporters was unbearable. No one had ever defied him so openly and lived to boast about it. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, stopping to pour a generous measure of expensive whiskey into a crystal glass. Not by a long shot. He moved to the window, staring out at his vast estate. Everything he saw belonged to him. The rolling hills, the pristine stables, the workers who scurried about like ants, all answering to his every command. He had built this empire through determination and ruthlessness, never allowing anyone or anything to stand in his way. And he wasn't about to start now. The telephone on his desk rang, interrupting his thoughts. He answered it with a brusque, "Yes." The voice on the other end was that of his lawyer, smooth and measured. "Mr. Valverde, I've been looking into the situation with the horse. There might be a legal avenue we haven't explored yet." Esteban's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm listening." Property rights are complex, especially when it comes to livestock. The girl may have found and cared for the horse, but without proper documentation of ownership transfer, Thunder legally remains yours. We could petition the court for an emergency order to recover stolen property. A slow smile spread across Esteban's face. "Do it. Whatever it takes. I want that horse back. And I want that girl to understand what happens when someone crosses Esteban Valverde." "Very well, sir. I'll begin the paperwork immediately. But I should warn you, this approach may generate publicity. Are you prepared for that?" Esteban's laugh was cold. "Publicity? Let them talk. By the time this is over, Sofia Martinez will wish she had never laid eyes on that horse." He hung up the phone and returned to the window, sipping his whiskey. Yes, he had retreated today, but only to regroup. The war, as Sophia had called it, was just beginning. and Esteban Valverde never lost a war. Back at the ranch, as the celebration wound down and the villagers began to head home, Sofia stood with Thunder under the star-filled sky. She ran her hand along his strong neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We won today," she whispered to him. "But something tells me our fight isn't over yet. No matter what happens next, I promise you this: as long as I'm alive, no one will ever hurt you again." Thunder gently pressed his forehead against hers, as if sealing a pact between them. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was celebrating Sofia's victory. She rose early as always, her routine unchanged despite the momentous events of the previous day. There were animals to feed, water to fetch, and chores to complete. Simple work, but honest work, that had structured her life for as long as she could remember. When she reached Thunder's makeshift stable, the horse greeted her with a soft whinny that made her smile. His recovery had been remarkable, from the frail, injured animal she had found by the creek to this magnificent creature whose spirit seemed unbreakable. She ran her hands along his flank, checking his injured leg out of habit. The swelling had reduced significantly, and though he would likely always have a slight limp, he moved with increasing confidence each day. "Good morning to you too," she said, offering him an apple she had saved from her own breakfast. "Ready for another day?" As Thunder munched contentedly, Sofia heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart quickened, fearing that Esteban had returned already, but she relaxed when she recognized Tomas riding toward her. His expression, however, was grave. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted. "News from town," he said, accepting the cup of water she offered. "Esteban's lawyer was seen at the courthouse this morning. They say he's filing legal papers to reclaim Thunder." Sofia's grip tightened on the wooden cup. "Can he do that?" "I don't know," Tomas admitted. "But Esteban has influence with the local judges. We should prepare ourselves." Before they could discuss further, they spotted a cloud of dust on the road leading to the ranch. It was a single rider coming fast. As he drew closer, they recognized the uniform of a court official. The man, middle-aged with a stern expression, dismounted and approached them with an air of official business. "Sofia Martinez?" he asked, though it was clear he already knew who she was. "Yes," she answered, standing a little straighter. The man produced an official-looking document from his satchel. "I am here to deliver this court summons. You are ordered to appear before Judge Morales 3 days from now regarding the disputed ownership of the horse in your possession. Until the matter is resolved, the animal is to remain here, but under the court's protection." Sofia took the paper with trembling hands. "What does that mean, under the court's protection?" "It means you can continue caring for the horse, but you cannot remove him from this property. Doing so would be considered contempt of court." The official glanced at Thunder, who was watching the proceedings with alert eyes. "I am also required to verify the animal's condition." He performed a cursory examination of Thunder, making notes in a small book. "The horse appears well cared for," he conceded almost reluctantly. "See that it remains so." With that, he mounted his horse and departed as quickly as he had come, leaving Sofia staring at the paper in her hands. "Let me see that," said Tomas, gently taking the document. He read it through, his frown deepening. "This is serious, Sofia. Esteban is claiming that Thunder was stolen from him, that you knew he was the owner when you found him." "That's ridiculous," Sofia exclaimed. "Thunder was abandoned, injured, and left to die. If Esteban truly cared for him, how could he have ended up in such a state?" I know," Tomas said soothingly. "But this isn't about the truth. It's about the law. And in the eyes of the law, Esteban Valverde has resources we don't." Sophia looked at Thunder, who had moved closer as if sensing her distress. "What do we do now?" "We fight," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Doña Clara approaching, leaning heavily on her walking stick. "Just as you did yesterday." The old woman had brought something with her, a battered leather folder that she handed to Sophia. "These belonged to my late husband. He was a lawyer before we moved to this valley. Not a fancy city lawyer like Esteban's, but he knew the law. Perhaps there's something in his notes that can help you." Sophia accepted the folder with gratitude. "Thank you, Doña Clara, but I don't know anything about legal matters." "Then it's time you learned," the old woman said firmly. "Because Esteban Valverde isn't going to stop until he gets what he wants, unless, of course, you prove to be more stubborn than he is." She smiled, revealing a hint of the spirited young woman she must once have been. "And from what I saw yesterday, I'd put my money on you." Over the next 2 days, Sophia barely slept. She pored over Doña Clara's husband's legal books by lamplight, trying to understand the complex language of laws and precedents. During the day, she continued caring for Thunder and her other animals, but her mind was always working, searching for a way to keep the horse she had come to love so deeply. Tomas and other villagers stopped by regularly, offering what help they could. Some brought food, others offered encouragement, and a few who could read helped her with the legal documents. It wasn't much, but it was all they had, the support of a community that had decided to stand together against injustice. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sophia rose before dawn. She bathed in the creek, then put on her best dress, a simple blue garment that had belonged to her mother. It was slightly faded but clean and neatly pressed. She braided her hair carefully and even added a small wildflower, a touch of defiance against the seriousness of the day ahead. Before leaving, she went to Thunder. The horse seemed to sense the importance of the moment, standing still as she pressed her forehead against his. "I don't know what will happen today," she whispered, "but no matter what, you'll always be mine in here." She placed a hand over her heart. "And I'll always be yours." The journey to town was silent. Tomas had insisted on accompanying her, as had Doña Clara and several other villagers. They formed a small but determined procession, drawing curious glances as they made their way through the town square toward the courthouse. The building itself was imposing, one of the few stone structures in the town, designed to intimidate those who entered seeking justice. As they approached the steps, Sophia saw a familiar figure waiting, Esteban Valverde, impeccably dressed in a white suit that seemed to glow in the morning sun. Beside him stood his lawyer and Hernan, both wearing expressions of smug confidence. Esteban's eyes met Sophia's and a cold smile played across his lips. "I see you decided to come," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "I thought perhaps you might try to run with my horse." "Thunder isn't your horse anymore," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "And I don't run from bullies." Esteban's smile faltered slightly. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that. The law is clear on matters of property." "Thunder isn't property," Sophia said, climbing the steps until she stood eye to eye with Esteban. Though he towered over her physically, there was something in her stance that made him take a small step back. "He's a living being who was abandoned and left to die. I saved him. I healed him. I loved him. That means more than any bill of sale." For a moment, something flickered in Esteban's eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or a grudging respect, but it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual cold arrogance. "Save your pretty speeches for the judge," he said dismissively. "Though I doubt they'll do you much good. Judge Morales is a personal friend." As if on cue, the courthouse doors swung open. A court official appeared, announcing that the proceedings were about to begin. Sophia took a deep breath, steadying herself for the battle ahead. Ready? Tomas asked quietly at her side. Sofia nodded, her gaze never leaving Esteban's. Ready. Together they walked into the courthouse, each step bringing them closer to a decision that would determine not just Thunder's fate, but a test of whether justice truly could prevail over power and wealth in their small corner of the world. The courtroom was smaller than Sofia had imagined, but no less intimidating. Wooden benches lined both sides of the aisle with a raised platform at the front where Judge Morales would preside. The room smelled of polish and paper, a sterile scent that made Sofia's throat tighten. She took a seat on the right side, with Tomas and the other villagers filling in behind her. Across the aisle, Esteban settled into his chair with the casual ease of someone who had been in courtrooms many times before. His lawyer, a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses, arranged papers on the table with methodical precision. Sofia clutched her own documents, the notes she had gleaned from Doña Clara's husband's legal books, along with a handwritten account of how she had found Thunder and nursed him back to health. The papers felt inadequate compared to the leather portfolio that Esteban's lawyer opened, revealing neatly typed documents and official-looking seals. A door at the front of the room opened, and everyone rose as Judge Morales entered. He was an older man with a stern face partially hidden behind a thick gray mustache. His black robe swished as he took his seat, adjusting his glasses before looking out at the gathered crowd. "Be seated," he said, his voice resonating through the small room. He shuffled through some papers before him. Case number 347 regarding the disputed ownership of one thoroughbred horse currently in the possession of Sofia Martinez, claimed as property by Esteban Valverde. The judge looked up, his gaze moving between Esteban and Sofia. "Mr. Valverde is represented by counsel. Ms. Martinez, do you have legal representation?" Sofia stood, her legs trembling slightly. "No, Your Honor. I can't afford a lawyer, but I will speak for myself." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Very well. Unusual, but not prohibited." He turned to Esteban's lawyer. "Mr. Ortega, you may present your case." Mr. Ortega rose smoothly, buttoning his expensive jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a straightforward case of property recovery. My client, Mr. Esteban Valverde, purchased the thoroughbred horse named Thunder 3 years ago for a considerable sum." He presented a document to the court clerk, who brought it to the judge. "Here is the bill of sale, properly notarized and registered." The judge examined the document, nodding slightly. "Continue." Mr. Valverde invested significant resources in training this champion racehorse. Approximately 3 months ago, Thunder suffered an injury during a race. While receiving medical care, the horse escaped from Mr. Valverde's property. Despite extensive searches, the animal could not be located. Ortega paused, his gaze falling on Sofia. "Until we discovered that Ms. Martinez had taken possession of the horse without making any attempt to locate its rightful owner." Sofia wanted to object, to shout that this was a lie, but she bit her tongue, remembering Doña Clara's advice to speak only when addressed by the judge. "Mr. Valverde simply wishes to recover his property, Your Honor," Ortega continued. "The law is clear on matters of ownership. The horse belongs to my client, and we request that the court order its immediate return." Judge Morales nodded again. "Thank you, Mr. Ortega." He turned to Sofia. "Ms. Martinez, you may now present your case." Sofia stood, clutching her papers so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, willing her voice not to shake. "Your Honor, I did not steal Thunder. I found him abandoned by a creek, severely injured and starving. He had been left to die." She glanced at Esteban, whose face remained impassive. "I took him home and cared for him. I spent every peso I had on medicines and special food. I stayed up nights with him when he was too weak to stand." She pulled out a small pouch from her pocket. These are the bandages I removed from his leg. You can still see the blood on them. If Mr. Valverde had been caring for Thunder as he claims, how did the horse end up in such a state? The judge frowned. That's not evidence, Ms. Martinez. Do you have any documentation of your finding the horse or of its condition? Sophia hesitated. No, Your Honor. I live alone. There was no one to witness it except my dog Luna and my donkey Bruno. A few chuckles from Esteban's side of the room made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. I see, said the judge, his tone suggesting he had already made up his mind. Is there anything else? Sophia felt desperation rising within her. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call witnesses who can testify to Thunder's condition when I brought him to my ranch, and how I've cared for him since. Judge Morales sighed but nodded. Very well. Call your first witness. One by one, the villagers who had accompanied Sophia took the stand. Doña Clara spoke of seeing Thunder soon after Sophia had found him, describing his emaciated condition and infected wounds. Tomas testified about helping Sophia gather special herbs to make poultices for Thunder's leg. Others told of how they had watched the bond grow between the girl and the horse, how she had sacrificed her own comfort to ensure his recovery. Throughout the testimonies, Esteban's expression grew increasingly annoyed. His lawyer frequently objected, calling the stories irrelevant sentimentality, but the judge, perhaps moved by the sincerity of the witnesses, allowed them to continue. When the last villager had spoken, Sophia called one final witness, the veterinarian from the next town over, who had eventually come to examine Thunder once Sophia had saved enough money for a consultation. The elderly vet spoke with professional authority. The horse had suffered a severe tendon injury, consistent with a racing accident, but what was unconscionable was the lack of proper care afterward. The animal showed signs of neglect, dehydration, malnourishment, and an untreated infection that nearly cost him his life. Had Ms. Martinez not intervened when she did, Thunder would certainly have died. And in your professional opinion, Sophia asked, gaining confidence, would a responsible owner allow a valuable racehorse to end up in such a condition? Objection, Ortega stood sharply. The witness is being asked to speculate. Sustained, said the judge, but the damage had been done. A murmur ran through the courtroom, and Esteban shifted uncomfortably in his seat. When all testimonies had been heard, Judge Morales removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is a more complex case than it initially appeared. Mr. Ortega, your client has provided proof of purchase, which establishes original ownership. However, Ms. Martinez has raised serious questions about the circumstances under which the horse came into her possession. The judge replaced his glasses, looking directly at Esteban. Mr. Valverde, I would like to hear from you directly. Can you explain how a horse under your care ended up in the condition described by these witnesses? Esteban rose, straightening his white jacket. Your Honor, I own many horses. I cannot personally oversee the care of each one. After Thunder's injury, I instructed my staff to ensure he received proper treatment. If there was negligence, it was on the part of employees who have since been dismissed. So you claim no personal responsibility? The judge pressed. Esteban's jaw tightened. I paid for the horse. I paid for its training. I paid for veterinary care after its injury. By law, that makes Thunder my property regardless of how he ended up by that creek. The coldness of his words seemed to fill the courtroom. Sophia looked at the judge, trying to read his expression, but his face remained impassive. I have heard enough, Judge Morales declared. This court will recess for 1 hour while I consider my decision. As the judge exited, the courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Sophia sank into her chair, emotionally exhausted. She had done everything she could, but was it enough? Across the aisle, Esteban conferred with his lawyer, their heads bent close together, occasionally glancing in her direction. Tomas squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "You did well, Sofia. Better than anyone expected." "But will it matter?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The law says Thunder belongs to him." "The law also recognizes right from wrong," Doña Clara said, joining them. "And what Esteban did was wrong. Even Judge Morales can see that." Sofia wished she could share their optimism. But as she looked at Esteban in his pristine white suit, representing wealth and power she could never match, she couldn't help but fear that justice might bow to influence once again. The hour of recess seemed to stretch endlessly. Sofia stepped outside the courthouse to breathe the fresh air, trying to calm her racing heart. In the town square, people went about their business, vendors selling fruit, children playing, an old man dozing on a bench, all unaware that just a few yards away, Thunder's fate hung in the balance. Tomas joined her, offering a small cup of water he had purchased from a nearby stall. "No matter what happens in there," he said, nodding toward the courthouse, "you've already won something important. You showed everyone that a poor girl from the valley can stand up to Esteban Valverde." Sofia took a sip of water, grateful for his kindness. "But what about Thunder? I didn't do this to prove a point. I did it for him." "I know," Tomas said softly, "and so does everyone else, even the judge." A bell rang, signaling that court would reconvene shortly. Sofia handed the cup back to Tomas, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the building. The courtroom was already filling up again, not just with those who had come with her, but with townspeople who had heard about the case and wanted to witness the outcome. Esteban sat at his table, looking irritated by the delay and the growing crowd. When Judge Morales entered, the room fell into a hush so complete that Sofia could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. The judge took his seat, arranged his papers, and surveyed the courtroom before speaking. "This case has presented the court with a challenging conflict between legal ownership and moral responsibility," he began. "On one hand, Mr. Valverde has provided documentation proving he purchased the horse known as Thunder. On the other hand, Ms. Martinez has demonstrated through credible testimony that the animal was found in a state of severe neglect, inconsistent with responsible ownership." The judge paused, looking directly at Esteban. "Mr. Valverde, while you may delegate the daily care of your animals to employees, as the owner, you bear ultimate responsibility for their welfare. The condition in which this horse was found represents, at minimum, a serious lapse in oversight on your part." Esteban's face darkened, but he remained silent. Judge Morales turned to Sofia. "Ms. Martinez, your compassion and dedication are commendable. You have invested not just your limited resources, but your heart in nursing this animal back to health. The law, however, does not automatically transfer ownership based on good deeds, no matter how admirable." Sofia's heart sank. Was the judge saying that Thunder would have to go back to Esteban? "After careful consideration," the judge continued, "I have reached a decision that attempts to address both the legal rights and moral obligations present in this case." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. "The court recognizes Mr. Valverde's legal ownership of the horse as established by proper documentation." Esteban's lawyer nodded in satisfaction, while murmurs of disappointment rippled through Sofia's supporters. "However," the judge continued, raising his voice slightly to quiet the murmurs, "in light of the demonstrated neglect and the extraordinary care provided by Ms. Martinez, I am imposing the following conditions. First, Mr. Valverde must reimburse Ms. Martinez for all expenses incurred in the horse's rehabilitation, to be documented and verified by the court." Sofia blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected this. "Second, before taking possession of the horse, Mr. Valverde must demonstrate that he has established proper conditions for its care, including regular veterinary examinations to be reported to this court for a period of 1 year. Esteban shifted in his seat, his expression growing increasingly annoyed. Third, the judge said, his tone becoming more severe, any future evidence of neglect or mistreatment will result in the permanent forfeiture of ownership rights. The judge paused again, looking between Sofia and Esteban. Finally, in recognition of the bond that has clearly formed between Ms. Martinez and the horse, I am granting her visitation rights. Ms. Martinez shall be permitted to visit the horse at Mr. Valverde's property twice weekly, at reasonable hours to be agreed upon by both parties. Esteban stood abruptly. This is outrageous, Your Honor. You can't dictate how I manage my property or who has access to it. Judge Morales fixed him with a stern gaze. I can and I have, Mr. Valverde. These conditions are non-negotiable. If you find them unacceptable, the court can arrange for the horse to remain with Ms. Martinez as its guardian, while ownership is permanently determined through a more extensive legal process, one that would involve a thorough investigation into the circumstances under which the animal came to be abandoned. The threat was clear, and Esteban knew it. Such an investigation might reveal more than he wanted made public. He slowly sat back down, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. These conditions will be formalized in a written order, the judge concluded. The transfer of the horse back to Mr. Valverde will occur 1 week from today after verification that proper accommodations have been prepared. Court is adjourned. With a bang of his gavel, Judge Morales rose and exited the courtroom. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the room erupted in a buzz of conversation. Sofia stood frozen, trying to process the decision. She would lose Thunder, but not completely. She could still see him, make sure he was being treated well. It wasn't what she had hoped for, but it wasn't a total defeat either. Tomas approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. It's not over, Sofia. The judge gave you a way to stay in Thunder's life. Before she could respond, Esteban appeared before her, his white suit somehow still immaculate despite the day's tensions. Enjoy your last week with my horse, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. As for these visitation rights, we'll see how long they last. Accidents happen on large estates, people get lost, gates get locked. The judge may have made his ruling, but we both know who really won today. With that, he turned and strode from the courtroom, his lawyer hurrying behind him. The journey back to the ranch was quiet, each person lost in their thoughts. When they arrived, Sofia went straight to Thunder, who greeted her with his usual gentle nudge. She buried her face in his mane, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to flow freely. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I tried my best, but it wasn't enough. That night, as Sofia sat on her porch watching the stars come out, Doña Clara arrived unexpectedly. The old woman settled herself on the step beside Sofia, her bones creaking as she lowered herself down. You're thinking of running, aren't you? She said without preamble. Sofia looked at her in surprise. How did you know? Because it's what I would be thinking in your position, Doña Clara replied with a small smile. Taking Thunder and disappearing before they can come for him. Sofia nodded slowly. The thought had indeed been circling in her mind since they left the courthouse. I could go north, maybe. Find work at another ranch, somewhere Esteban wouldn't think to look. You could, Doña Clara agreed, but you'd always be looking over your shoulder, and Thunder would be a difficult horse to hide. He's too distinctive, too special. Then what should I do? Just hand him over to Esteban? Sofia's voice cracked with emotion. You heard what he said. Those visitation rights won't mean anything once he has Thunder back on his property. Doña Clara was quiet for a moment, her gnarled hands folded in her lap. There might be another way, she finally said. My nephew, the one who works with horses in the capital, he told me something interesting about Esteban Valverde. Sophia looked at her questioningly. What? It seems that not all of Esteban's business dealings are as clean as that white suit he wears, Doña Clara said, lowering her voice, though there was no one else around to hear. My nephew has friends who work at the Racing Commission. They've been watching Esteban for some time, suspicious about certain races, certain bets. Sophia's eyes widened as she began to understand what Doña Clara was suggesting. You think Esteban? I think there's more to the story of why Thunder was abandoned, Doña Clara said carefully. And I think if we can discover what that is before the week is up, you might have a stronger case than the judge realized. For the first time since the verdict, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. But how? We only have a week, and Esteban has already won in court. Doña Clara patted her hand. Sometimes, Nina, justice needs a little help finding its way. Are you willing to fight one more round for Thunder? Sophia looked toward the stable where Thunder rested, then back at the determined face of the old woman beside her. Yes, she said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes. Dawn had barely broken when Sophia, Tomas, and Doña Clara set out for the capital. They traveled in Tomas's old truck, bouncing along rough roads as the landscape gradually changed from rural countryside to bustling city streets. Sophia had never been to the capital before, and under different circumstances, she might have marveled at the tall buildings and crowded avenues. But today, her mind was focused on only one thing: finding a way to keep Thunder. Doña Clara directed them to a modest building on the outskirts of the city, where her nephew Miguel worked as an assistant trainer at a racing stable. Miguel, a lean man with kind eyes, welcomed them into a small office cluttered with racing forms and schedules. Tia Clara told me about your situation, he said to Sophia after introductions were made. It's not the first time I've heard complaints about Esteban Valverde. What do you know about him? Sophia asked eagerly. Miguel glanced at the door to ensure they were alone. Valverde has a reputation in racing circles. He wins too often, and sometimes in ways that don't make sense. There have been rumors about doped horses, paid-off jockeys, fixed races, but nothing anyone could prove. Until now, perhaps, Doña Clara interjected. Tell them what you told me about Thunder. Miguel nodded gravely. The race where Thunder was injured wasn't just any race. It was the regional championship, with the biggest purse of the season. Valverde had another horse running, Midnight Storm, who was considered the underdog against Thunder. He had two horses in the same race? Tomas asked, confused. It happens sometimes with wealthy owners, Miguel explained. But what was strange was that Valverde placed an enormous bet on Midnight Storm to win, much larger than what would be considered normal, even for someone of his wealth. Sophia's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Are you saying he wanted Thunder to lose? I'm saying that Thunder was the favorite to win, and Valverde stood to make a fortune if his other horse won instead, Miguel replied cautiously. And then, conveniently, Thunder had an accident during the race. But that would mean... Sophia couldn't finish the thought. It would mean he may have orchestrated his own horse's injury, Miguel said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's monstrous, but not unheard of in the darker corners of the racing world. We need proof, Tomas said firmly. Suspicion isn't enough. Miguel pulled a folder from his desk drawer. I've been collecting information, betting records, race reports, veterinary examinations. There's a pattern with Valverde's horses. Several have had accidents or suddenly performed poorly after being favored to win, always when he had significant bets on other outcomes. He handed the folder to Sophia. But the smoking gun is this: the veterinary report from the track doctor who initially examined Thunder after his fall. I obtained it from a friend who works at the Racing Commission. Look at the third paragraph. Sophia read aloud. Examination reveals inflammation consistent with a recent injection at site A7, possibly administered within hours before the race. Recommend toxicology screening. But this is different from what was presented in court. Exactly, Miguel said grimly. The official report submitted later omitted this finding. Someone altered it, and I suspect money changed hands to make that happen. This is why he abandoned Thunder, Sophia realized, her voice trembling with anger. Not just because he was injured and couldn't race anymore, but because a proper examination might reveal what really happened. And if that came to light, Valverde would be banned from racing for life, Miguel confirmed, not to mention facing criminal charges for animal cruelty and fraud. Sophia clutched the folder to her chest. This changes everything. We need to show this to Judge Morales immediately. The journey back was tense but hopeful. They arrived at the courthouse just as it was closing for the day, but Sophia refused to leave until they were allowed to see the judge. Finally, after much pleading, a sympathetic clerk escorted them to Judge Morales' chambers. The judge was surprised by their intrusion, but agreed to review the evidence. As he read through Miguel's documents, his expression grew increasingly grave. When he finished, he looked up at Sophia with new respect in his eyes. This is deeply troubling, Ms. Martinez. If authentic, these documents suggest not only neglect, but deliberate harm to the animal in question. He reached for his phone. I will issue an emergency stay on my previous order pending investigation of these allegations. In the meantime, Thunder will remain in your care. The news spread quickly through the town. By the time Sophia returned to her ranch, neighbors had gathered to hear what had happened. Among them stood Hernan, Esteban's foreman, his face ashen. Mr. Valverde sent me to collect the horse tomorrow, he said stiffly. But I've just received word about the judge's new order. You can tell Esteban that Thunder is staying with me, Sophia replied, unable to keep a note of triumph from her voice. Hernan hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's something you should know. I was the one who took Thunder to the creek that night. Esteban ordered me to get rid of the problem. I couldn't bring myself to do worse, so I left him where I thought someone might find him. He looked away, shame evident in his posture. I never thought anyone would care enough to save him. Sophia was speechless, caught between anger at what Hernan had done and gratitude that he hadn't done worse. I'm willing to testify, Hernan added quietly. About everything. The injection before the race, the altered veterinary reports, the orders to abandon Thunder. I've had enough of Esteban Valverde's methods. 2 days later, the Racing Commission launched a formal investigation into Esteban Valverde's activities. With Hernan's testimony and the evidence Miguel had gathered, the case against him grew stronger by the hour. Esteban's reputation crumbled as quickly as a house of cards in a strong wind. Former employees came forward with stories of mistreatment and corruption, and other horse owners spoke of suspicious incidents during races against Valverde's animals. On the morning Esteban was scheduled to appear before the Racing Commission, news reached the town that his estate had been found empty. He had fled during the night, taking what valuables he could carry, abandoning his property and employees, just as he had abandoned Thunder. Judge Morales officially reversed his decision, granting full ownership of Thunder to Sophia. In light of the evidence of Mr. Valverde's criminal mistreatment, his order read, and Ms. Martinez's demonstrated care and compassion, the court finds that the best interest of the animal is served by this permanent placement. As Sophia stood in the paddock watching Thunder graze peacefully, Tomas joined her, leaning against the fence. I heard they're selling Valverde's estate, he said. All his horses, his land, everything is being liquidated to pay his debts and legal claims. What will happen to the other horses? Sophia asked, concerned. Tomas smiled. That's the best part. The court has appointed a trustee to oversee their care until new homes can be found. And guess who they asked to consult on their treatment? Sophia looked at him in surprise. Me? Your reputation has spread, Sophia. People are calling you the horse whisperer of the valley. The judge thinks you have a special gift. Sophia turned back to Thunder, who had raised his head as if sensing he was the topic of conversation. His eyes, once filled with pain and fear, now shone with tranquility and trust. He trotted over to her, his gait still slightly uneven from his old injury, but strong and confident nonetheless. As she stroked his sleek neck, Sophia realized that their struggle had changed not just Thunder's fate, but her own as well. What had begun as a simple act of compassion for an abandoned horse had revealed her true calling, to be a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. "What do you think, Thunder?" she whispered. "Should we help the others too?" Thunder gently pressed his forehead against hers as he had done so many times before, but this time it felt like more than affection. It felt like a promise, a partnership, a future unfolding before them like the valley stretching to the distant mountains, full of possibility and hope.